Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our fourth season, we're looking at Kenneth Branagh's 2011 film, Thor. I'm Matthew Fox from theethicalpanda.com.
And I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Real Film Podcast.
And today we're talking about minute 17, which begins with Thor telling Heimdall to tell no one where they're going, and ends with Heimdall warning Thor. Joining us again, we have Krissy, Lenz, and Nathan Blackwell from the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast. And so let me ask you two both, as part of your love of all things 80s, do 80s comics fall into that, or do you kind of get into the MCU through other ways?
My brother was the comic book owner, and my younger brother. And so I would leaf through his stuff, and especially the books, like the big compendium books of the old, like original, like first 10 Spider-Man, or like they would put out those books that would just talk about the whole canon and all the different characters and villains. It's weird. I was really into superheroes, but it was really more superhero culture and world building than the specific comics.
I can see that.
Yeah, I never knew from comics. To me, Thor was from Adventures in Babysitting and was mainly a car mechanic.
Looked like Vincent D'Onofrio, right?
Speaking of most excellent 80s movies.
Yeah, I was like, you mean Vincent
Right.
D'Onofrio from Adventures in Babysitting? Yeah, I know.
Oh my God, I forgot he was in that movie.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mostly just remember
Thor.
the babysitting blues. So, well, we'll get more into your thoughts on all that right after this quick message.
So how do you think you would handle traveling through the Bifrost? Where do you think that Laufey's throne is actually facing? And what's your opinion of how they treated Idris Elba in this film? We would love to get your thoughts and feedback and have you join us in the conversation. Join us over in our Facebook group, the Marvel Movie Minute Podcast Executive Lounge. We would love to have you jump into the conversation and join us there. We are also on Instagram and Twitter. Just go to truestory.fm/Marvel Movie Minute and click on the link for the social of your choice.
What most grabbed you about this minute?
Probably getting a big close-up of giant Gimli, aka Ray Stevenson. And I'm sure you guys have talked about the Warriors 3 before, but in revisiting Thor, that's one of the things that stands out. It's like, oh yeah, these guys,
guys, they're fun. That's one of the things that I like about Marvel in particular is like they sprinkle in these moments of fun of teasing Loki, who so deserves to be teased.
Yeah, they're a little bit of a Greek chorus in this movie. I mean, they don't do enough to be that, but they kind of have, especially because there's a little bit to try to give them some different, identification, but they really just kind of seem like these three people. It's hard to, one really loves food, one really loves himself, one just loves battle, but kind of not much beyond that.
They're kind of like these secondary, it's the cup and the frog in the Disney movie. It's like, oh, they had to shovel in just like 4 more characters into this, and like it's like, who's going to be this? They seem like these little background characters that that when it came around to eventually dispatching or slaughtering them, a la like Transformers the movie and Thor Ragnarok, it's like, oh yeah, those guys. Because that's an interesting thing is that even though, there may be a big gap of seeing some of the Thor movies, you still kind of are up to date with Thor and Odin and Loki and the characters that really kind of are with us. That they kind of get sprinkled around through the MCU and you remember them. But sometimes these secondary little characters that are just made for like the Thor movies or maybe and that's the thing, even in the Iron Man movies, I don't feel like there was any superfluous characters like there was in this one.
Well, they definitely feel like characters that they are very specifically characters that came from the comics. They weren't in Norse mythology. Mm-hmm. And even in the comics, they feel kind of a little more that they're just there to kind of help Thor and what he needs with his adventures and stuff. Yeah, it's like they're written weirdly. And honestly, I'm starting to feel like Kenneth Branagh just really didn't like these characters. Yeah. Because when you read the script and you see how much more there is of them in the script, it's like, I think Kenneth Branagh is at a point where he's like, let's just cut out as much as we possibly can of those characters. Just keep what's necessary so that we don't have to deal with all their they're really kind of low end comedy is what we end up getting
right.
Otherwise.
Yeah. And it's funny because they're like, I do wish we had them as more developed, more interesting characters.
Yeah.
But I think you're kind of right. There's just, it's now been a little while since we've talked about what's happening back on Earth, but we're also getting, Jane hangs out with two people between Darcy and the Doctor. We're getting so many of these, as you said, the kind of side superfluous characters introduced. There isn't really much room for more. And given how badly they're written in the script that got deleted, I'm perfectly fine with Branaghl's decisions here.
Yeah, because the conversation when they walk past Loki, Volstagg is just like, "What happened? Your silver tongue turned to lead." And then Loki is just like, "Get me off this bridge before it cracks under your girth." Volstagg and Fandral share a laugh, and it's just like, God, it's just like all this jokes about this stuff. It's just too much. So I'm glad that it's thinned out.
Yeah, I like it better with Loki just being like bummed out because he that really puts him in the spot of being this little brother who is dragged along and can't get out of his older brother's shadow and is always being picked on by his big brother's friends. Like, you, at least if you're me, you sort of feel for him.
Well, especially knowing what we do now, that this whole thing is Loki kind of trying to set up Thor for a fall. Often you'll see that moment where like someone's betraying someone they know. And like they start to maybe even have second thoughts, but then the person they're betraying does something really awful again. They're like, yep. Like that's kind of what I get from Loki here is like, yeah, if you ever had any doubts about sending all these people into trouble, like, yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah, they're not nice. They're not cool to him,
It's such a weird moment though, because like Loki gets nowhere with Heimdall right here, and Thor kind of interrupts, but Thor seems so mad, and I'm like, is he mad that Loki was getting nowhere? Like Loki was like, leave it to me, and then got nowhere. But he was kind of getting somewhere because Heimdall seems like, I'm going to let you by because I'm pissed the fact that these frost giants got by me. So I'm so confused by the start of this minute. Like, why is Thor like so angry here?
I think Thor is just angry.
He's always shoving ahead, like especially in these minutes that we're looking at. Like Thor is always like shoving to get into the front of the pack, which is his place.
His growth as a character is he's very impatient, but he's also very much kind of like, I am a princeling and you have to follow me. I know what we're going to do, what is best. Stop dicking around.
And what's true and what's not true. Like he's so convinced of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't get the sense that he's mad at either Loki or Heimdall. I think what you're saying, he's just so... Every minute that he's not slaughtering frost giants is a minute where the things that Odin said are still in his head. He has to prove Odin wrong. He has to show that he is the rightful king, the heir to the throne.
And that's such a big theme of all the Marvel movies, I think, is like these characters who have something to prove. Versus like eventually you get to Captain Marvel who's like, I have nothing to prove, and it's like, yeah, you don't, because that's the journey is like to get over this raging STP.
I also think, and tell me if I'm digging too deep here, because we're all asking about sort of Loki. Loki seems like, what wouldn't he know that Heimdall would not love this kind of behavior from him? We know that, like before we were talking about, you two weren't on this, but in the minutes where Thor says yes to Loki's plan, but then says, and Loki, you're coming with us. And Loki clearly looks shocked. I wonder if maybe he's trying to fail so badly and annoy Heimdall so badly that maybe either Heimdall says, like, you all can go, but Loki can't, or, that Thor is like, Loki, you're useless. We're going on ahead. Like, am I reading too much into it, or is it possibly this is one more step of Loki's manipulation? That's
an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah, that is interesting. I feel like they, especially looking back on the Loki we know now, it just seems like and the Thor we know now, it just seems like they're using young man moves. Like they're still full of a lot of confidence, but they've got a couple of stumbles in what they're doing. Fair.
Well, it does make me wonder, like, was he trying, because, and again, this was a deleted scene where we had Loki, as they were getting ready to ride off, Loki went and talked to one of the guards. We don't know what he was saying. We'll find out later. Hogan sees him speaking to the guard, is he trying to get the word, and even with Heimdall, is he trying to get the word to Odin basically as fast as possible to like shut down this mission and to get Thor into trouble? Like, does he even care if they go to Jotunheim at this point, or is his goal just getting Thor in trouble?
Oh, so maybe he's kind of just stalling. Like he just wants the conversation to be drawn out. That's really possible.
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like whatever ends up happening, it still finds a way to work into Loki's plans. So I feel like he's not going to lose no matter what.
And I think we mentioned it, and that actually plays very much into the mythology, where it's not that Loki plans 10 steps ahead all the time. It's that he's a very good improviser. You know, whatever happens, he can twist it.
And that's why I love him so dearly, because he's an improviser.
Right?
Yeah. So that's the thing. If you're constantly improvising and redirecting and changing your plan, and then it works out, then of course it was meant to be from the beginning, you know?
Yeah. I remember I took an improv class a long time ago, and that was one of the things they taught us was, you know, like everything is always part of the plan. You know, you always say yes. And I think that's very much Loki.
Right.
So in the same regard, Thor then says to Heimdall, you know, tell no one where we've gone.
Right.
And I thought it's very telling, that he seems to think Heimdall will listen to that order. And also that Heimdall quite pointedly doesn't say a word in response. He doesn't even like acknowledge that Thor said it. And Thor doesn't even notice that. He just is so, you know, it's like that spoiled kid who thinks everyone works for him. He's convinced he can give the order and just walk right off and doesn't even pay attention to the fact that Heimdall's probably like, whatever, kid, I'm certainly not doing that.
Right. I kind of felt like that moment to where it was almost the that power shift of them growing up. But again, it might be me reading into it of the Thor and Loki I know now, and then seeing them in this younger form, but of almost like the adult, you know, who supervises the kids, and now the kids are old enough to be more powerful than the supervisor. You know, it's almost kind of like Thor was like flexing there, and Heimdall is like keeping his dignity, but he's kind of thinking to himself, he's right. There's actually a slight power dynamic of them being equals, or them now kind of being in charge.
It's interesting because like Heimdall, I mean, he carries so much ability to control the situation, but clearly still sides with Thor and agrees to go along with it, because Thor says that, tells him, you know, what's what, and then just walks past. Like they all go past and head inside. And Heimdall, all he really has to do is just stand there. I mean, they can't go anywhere unless he actually agrees to it and comes inside and operates the Bifrost. So it's interesting that even with that, the way that Thor speaks to him and kind of commands him and just walks off, Heimdall still, in the end, ends up agreeing and just kind of goes along with it.
I had something that's totally neither here nor there, and you can absolutely just completely eliminate from this podcast altogether. But, and it may be showing my own lack of knowledge, but when he is standing there and he's like, you know, got the sword and he's like standing there and he's got the big winged headdress, it looks like the Steppenwolf character. Am I getting the right character? Yeah. Like he just looks, big shoulders.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's interesting.
From the DC, the big DC bad guy. It's like, oh, okay. So like big Y-shaped head, and
they could do a spin-off Steppen Brothers.
Yeah.
Please know that character was one of the worst parts of a very, very bad movie. But yes. But yeah, no, I can see that as well. And so then we get this like great shot of them walking into the observatory. And what do you think is going on here? Because we see these kind of like semicircles. It looks almost like a labyrinth, except it's perfectly symmetrical. And they kind of divide up and they're walking, but they're not walking in straight lines. Like they're kind of walking in the semicircle around. What do you get out of those scenes that we get there?
Well, clearly it again just goes to show how much Kenneth Branagh loves playing with camera angles and camera position, because the fact that he goes for this God's eye view shot directly at the top of, I guess, the dais upon which is the kind of the keyhole that Heimdall will use to operate it. But it creates such a, I don't know, it's kind of like, it's a very dizzying shot, the way that the lines on the floor are and the way the camera moves. It's just like this kind of, you're looking into this giant god eye is kind of what it looks like. It's such an interesting angle. I think he's just playing with a really fascinating angle here.
Yeah, and then when the Bifrost So what is the Bifrost? Is that everything, or is it also the actual like machine that's spinning around? Does that have a specific name?
So, well, the machine that we're in is Heimdall's Observatory,
Okay.
and which actually the actual name is the Himmelbjorg, if you were wondering. So they're inside the Himmelbjorg, and it's this big observatory which was invented for the film because in the comics and even in Norse mythology, I mean, it literally is just like they hop on a rainbow and zip off to some
on a
other
magical
place.
Pony. Yeah,
right, with a unicorn.
Lucky Charms behind them.
This is very much a design for the film where they wanted to create something that, and it was this big building, and I don't know, I love the way that they designed it, where it has like the building almost looks bifurcated, like right down the middle from the entire sphere ball of the shell of the room and the turret, and then it's on kind of like. It's attached at an axles across the middle, but the whole exterior spins from this machinery that operates from the bottom. And it's what happens when Heimdall inserts Hofund into the keyhole, I guess, it's Bifrost energy that is released, and that Bifrost energy is what comes out. And interestingly, they designed it to look like the shape of kind of a Yggdrasil lightning look in the room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when the whole room and the machine starts spinning around, that's such a cool effect. I felt like that was so well done.
And I definitely got the same impression you did. It feels like there's two distinct parts to it with that observatory in the middle. And I think the idea here is that the part that leads from Asgard out to the observatory that kind of goes from day into the starry night, that's the Rainbow Bridge. And then the Bifrost is what's shot out of the kind of round thing with yes, it looks phallic, but there's another comparison I'll make in a second.
It's the turret, yeah.
The turret's the best way to describe it. So I think that's what's being gone for, but it's definitely not kind of really clarified.
Mm-hmm. They do say it somewhere, and I can't find where I wrote it down, but basically the Rainbow Bridge contains the Bifrost energy, and it all converges right here, and somehow this is pulling that energy from the Rainbow Bridge and using it to generate these Bifrost portals. So so there is a connection between the two that they're trying to make in the film, and they're doing it in a way where it's designed to basically look like a wormhole, as opposed to them just kind of galloping off on a rainbow through space.
That was in the first draft.
I will say, and this will show my geek leanings, and so perhaps other people don't have this image like embedded in their head, but when I see that turret, like the round kind of dome with the gun, whatever it is sticking out of it, to me it looks so much like the ion cannon in Empire Strikes Back.
Oh, sure.
I'm guessing maybe 10 listeners know what I'm talking about there, but Nathan, at least seems like you know what I'm getting at. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there we go.
I have a feeling probably more people than you realize are.
That's entirely possible. It's entirely possible.
I think you're speaking to the right crowd.
And I do love it, and this is kind of what we were all talking about in the last minute. I noticed this time as I was rewatching, once the observatory starts spinning, you can hear, like, it sounds like machinery spinning up, So it's really, again, this idea of, yes, it's powered by a sword and it looks kind of like, ooh, spooky magic, but it's very much technological.
But it's still like, to me at least, steampunky, like all of the gears and the concentric circles and the keys and the movement and all of it seems like the royalist, fanciest steampunk.
Yeah, that's very true.
And I love how the lightning looks like, those things that you touch, the little glass balls that have the little electric thing on the inside, and you touch it and the little electricity shoots from the center up to where your fingers are touching the glass. Like, it looks like you're inside one of those things, the way that the electricity is just like shooting across from the center all the way to almost like the little centers of each of those concentric circles that are all over the walls. It's such an interesting look. We
should come up with a cosplay group that does, instead of steampunk, it's Bifrost punk. So it's like
I like it.
Asgardian punk.
That's right. That's right. Well, and I love how Heimdall, he's got his big sword, but now he's got the hilt of it, or the cross guard, has some other, they looked like hand guards that were on the sword handle, but it actually, now that he flips it over, you see, it's actually handles that he can hold on to that he uses when he's inserting the sword. So it's an interesting way that sword is very specifically designed for this.
Again, it's a Keyblade. Best way to describe it. And once again, clearly this was done intentionally for podcasts like ours, but we, for the second time in a row, have Heimdall about to give a big important comment and gets cut off right at the minute.
Remember, the most important thing that you must know is...
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. All right. Any other last comments folks have about this minute?
So I started off making fun of giant fat Gimli, but then just looking up his IMDb page, like, you know, that Ray Stevenson, he's like the Punisher. He like plays like really, really tough dudes, like really scary dudes, and so props to him for going for it. You know, for the silly kind of butt of the joke character.
You know, as a fellow rotund ginger, I will describe him as thick rather than fat. You know, that there's an honorable girth to his warriorness.
And here comes the honorable girth.
Sturdy.
There you go.
Sturdy.
Oh,
There you
yes.
go. There you go.
I had a question that I don't think will ever get answered in any of the films, unfortunately, but I'm so curious about the way that this mechanism works, because every time we see it operate, it always points the same way, right? The turret comes down and points out into space and blast off. You go zipping off to a different realm. But does it point it in a different direction? Like if they were going to go to Midgard, would it kind of stop like at a three quarters of the way down? If they were going to Niflheim, like, you know, how does it aim?
It's a series
I'm
of
very
mirrors.
confused by that.
Mirrors.
It's like they have mirrors in space
yeah.
that they shoot at. Now I want to see that. I want to see all the little dwarves like from Legend kind of positioning all the
It's just one dude.
mirrors in space.
Or like in Labyrinth, when the big thing goes by and there's one little guy on a bike.
Yep.
Right.
Pedaling behind it.
Didn't look great for the montage.
Not a great cut there. All right. Well, thank you both again so much for being a part of this. Definitely, folks should check out your podcast, the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast. But if people want to find other stuff you're doing, where can they look?
Well, Krissy, you actually have an improv theater, don't you? Tell us more.
I do. Speaking of improv, if you want to learn to be more like Loki, please look me up at the Neighborhood Comedy Theater, which is at NCTPHX on all of the medias that are social.
Increase your Lokiness by 70%. Guaranteed.
Guaranteed.
Now I understand why your face lit up when I talked about being in an improv class long ago.
Yep. That's me.
And Nathan?
You should always find Nathan and all of Squishy Studios offerings. They are worth watching always.
So yeah, the my film projects, squishystudios.com. That's the easiest way. We've got YouTubes and the Facebooks and all that other stuff, but squishystudios.com is the easiest way.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. And to all those folks who are listening, thank you as well for being a part of this, and have a great day.
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is One Last Ride by Martin Puringer. Find the show at truestory.fm, and if your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, consider doing that for this show.